Hello everyone, this is Paul the Okanite coming to you today with a deeper look at Into the Whirlpool, the first in the Tattered Flag series games designed by Hermann Luttmann and published by Blue Panther LLC. Into the Whirlpool is an engagement level game featuring the action around Rose's wheat field during the Battle of Gettysburg on July 2nd, 1863. As an engagement level game, it zooms in on one small but very significant part of the Battle of Gettysburg that happened during the second day of the battle. And for our look at the game, we're going to be using Scenario 1, which is entitled First Contact, which has 3 regiments of Robertson's Brigade, including the elite 1st Texas, against elements of the Union 5th Corps, including 3 sections of artillery. Note that Into the Whirlpool, the Confederates don't have any artillery. Only the Union has artillery. The Confederates were on the attack. The artillery had been left behind, so they don't have any. But the Union certainly does. And while not as high quality and not as big in terms of brigade strength, the Union has elements of 2 brigades, Ward's Brigade and de Trobriand's Brigade, to fend off the Southerners. To win, the Southerners have to capture 1 or 2 of these tiddlywinks that you see on the map. If they get more than that, they win a major victory. Now, I haven't set up yet. I just want to show you the forces. And before I actually start moving counters around, just touch on what it is we're seeing in this game. As an engagement level game, it is not tactical in the sense of a squad leader, but still each unit counter is a little bit more than 100 guys, okay? And each artillery counter is 2 or 3 guns. So we've gone below the usual regimental and battery level as far as what is in the counters. The highest level represented on the map are brigade commanders for the infantry brigades. There are no division commanders, corps commanders, and except in the most abstract terms, they are not really doing anything in this game. This is really an infantryman's fight. Upper command has done their thing, they've maneuvered the forces, they've got them in the area, and now it's up to the troops to fight it out. Here you see General Robertson, who is the brigade leader of the brigade by his name. Each of the infantry regiments is attached to a specific brigade who is subject to their brigade commander's orders. Every regiment in the brigade is subject to the same order that has been given by the brigade commander, unless they are out of command, in which case, if the brigade changes its orders and the regiment is out of command, they don't get the word. They are still operating under the old order. Infantry regiments and artillery brigades are known as formations. Many of the rules in the game relate to what formations can do and how they operate. Some rules are specific to infantry, some rules are specific to artillery. The rules, which are reasonably well written, especially for the first entry in this new series of games, do things that I think will be improved on in later versions. For example, I think that there are sections of the rules that use the word formation interchangeably with infantry regiment and artillery battery, where they mean to talk about specifically one of those 3 things. Formations are both artillery and infantry. If something refers to infantry, it should say infantry regiment. But there are sections that freely intermix that terminology and confuse the fact that they're really talking about infantry, not formations as they've been defined in the rulebook. One example of this occurs where the rulebook is describing order changes, where they start getting into out-of-command formations and discussing regiments and what happens with regiments that are out of command with regard to order changes. Now, since only infantry regiments have orders, the term formation simply should not be used. If you mean infantry regiment, you should say so. Artillery batteries do not have orders, but whenever you use the word formation, it's defined as including both infantry and artillery, so you should not freely intermix those. And I see that in other parts of the book too. It's figure-outable, but it does make you pause to think what the rule book is talking about unnecessarily. But each of these three stacks represents one infantry regiment that are part of Robertson's brigade. Each of these is a separate formation, subject to formation rules in the rulebook. And here we see the 3rd Arkansas, which is an infantry regiment or formation that lives inside of Robertson's brigade. The 3rd Arkansas consists of 4 unit counters, each representing the companies that are inside of the 3rd Arkansas. Since there's generally 10 companies in an infantry regiment, each one of these represents 2 to 3 infantry companies at whatever strength they are at that time. And here's one of the unit counters in the 3rd Arkansas. From the upper left, we see the 4 representing the quality of the troops, which range from 1 being really bad raw recruits to 5 being elite. So these guys are quite good. The 1/4 is identifying this specific counter as being the first of 4 that comprise the 3rd Arkansas. The first unit of the 4 is the command stand. That's why we see the flag on here in the middle of the counter. And to the upper right, we see the brown circle and the 2 telling you what part of the Army this lives in, the division and the corps. And here we see similar nomenclature on a Union unit. In this case, it is part of the 86th New York. This would be the command stand, or first of 2 stands within that regiment. To the upper right, we have a diamond, which is using the corps badging that was instituted by General Hooker sometime around the Battle of Chancellorsville. And the diamond means it's 3rd Corps, so it's one of Uncle Dan's best. The red diamond means that it is the 2nd Division of the 3rd Corps. They use red, white, and blue to identify the first 3 lower echelon units within the Corps. Red being the first, white being the second, blue being the third. And the 2 is telling you it's the 2nd Brigade. So just looking at that, you can see, of course, this is Army Potomac, 3rd Corps, 1st Division, 2nd Brigade. In that little tiny space, it gives you a lot of information, of course, and this is the 86th New York within that 2nd Brigade. And with our setup, we have 1 regiment from de Trobriand's brigade. He only has 1 present at the beginning of this engagement, which starts at 4:15 in the afternoon, right at the beginning of Longstreet's attack that day. And the scenario runs for 4 turns or 1 hour. We have Union artillery set up at the edge of Rose's wheat field, and we have Ward's brigade set up protecting the victory objectives. Opposing them, we have Robertson with the 1st Texas, and the Arkansas boys that are no slouches and rather normal Georgia troops behind them. The procedure for setting up the game is listed in the early part of the rule book, and it goes on and says, put the turn track in a convenient place. Okay, fine. The battle cards are shuffled, put nearby. Okay. What they don't tell you is that each side picks 2 random battle cards at the beginning of the scenario. They don't tell you that until almost the end of the rule book when they talk about the battle cards. In my view, that should be said right here where it's talking about setting up the game. If you're supposed to take 2 cards to set up the game, that should appear in the setup section, right? Then, okay, we teach guys, he takes his colored dice, and players set up their counters and leaders per the instructions, which are in text form in the scenario book, as well as graphically on these big setup charts that I showed you in my first video. The other thing that it doesn't tell you is that there is a rule that appears in the initiative section of the rule book that the Southerners, the Confederacy, always starts as the initiative player on turn 1. They are, after all, conducting a major attack, so it makes sense that they would be the initiative player. So it'd be nice if it said that in the setup part of the rule book as well. The very first phase of the turn sequence is the initiative phase. Quite honestly, this one messed me up a little bit. When I read the rules the first time, I didn't quite get it right. And when I did my playthrough offline, I wasn't quite doing it right. And then I read the rules another time and started recording, and I still was making the same mistake. So I want to touch on this one a little bit more than I do on some other stuff. Now, when you look at this section, It looks to me, at first glance, is that there's two possible outcomes for the initiative check, which essentially amounts to a roll-off between the two players. To me, when you first look at this, it looks like you could have dominant initiative or momentum initiative. It's like, okay, there's two ways to go. Well, that's not true. When you look at the player aid, you see that there's actually a third way, which is documented here in the first part of this section in the second arrow, where it says the player with the higher die roll is the initiative player and flips the game turn marker accordingly to show their side has the initiative this game turn. Well, that's kind of what I expected to see, but when I look down in initiative effects, this case is not there. So it's really, there's regular run-of-the-mill initiative, there's dominant initiative, and there's momentum initiative. Those are not the same thing. When one side rolls a higher number, but not double or more that the other side rolled, they are the initiative player. They get to choose which side goes first. They can choose themselves. They can choose the other side. Sometimes there's good reasons to let the other side go first, let them exhaust more of their activations up front, and then maybe you could have some opportunities later on in the turn. The next step up the hierarchy would be momentum initiative. Momentum initiative is achieved when the two sides roll the same number, doubles. Each side rolls a 6, each side rolls an 8, whatever it is. So then the player who had the initiative the prior turn, not the one who moved first, but who actually had the initiative, who moved first, will get to choose who goes first to this turn, but they also get to choose to activate one regiment of an already activated brigade from a prior activation phase, or an artillery battery. And if you look at the player aid cards that describe the initiative, they didn't say that you could do an artillery battery. When you read the rules, it's here. When you roll doubles, then you're carrying forward the momentum from the prior turn. And finally, dominant initiative. And that's when one player rolls at least double the other. And when one player rolls at least double the other, they get to activate an entire additional brigade or battery. So most of the time, I assume you'd pick a brigade, because that can be lots of regiments instead of like two counters that is the artillery battery. But tactics matter, so sometimes the battery may be more important. So when you achieve either dominant initiative or momentum initiative, in addition to having the turn flag showing your colors, you tip it as it shows here in the rulebook, showing dominant or momentum being the top of the counter. They don't have a label for how to tip the counter when you just have regular old run-of-the-mill initiative. That kind of threw me, I think. Read this section closely. It is correctly documented, but it's just a little misleading if you're not on your A game when you read it. Once we know who is active, that side gets to pick either one or two entities to activate. In this case, an entity is an infantry brigade or artillery battery. The Federals get to activate two such entities in a given activation impulse, and the Southerners one. As I've indicated, the initiative for the first turn automatically belongs to the Confederates. So here we go. I think the Confederates' best course is to go ahead and let the Union go first. Why not? To kick things off, the Union player is going to activate his infantry. He has two brigades out here. He gets to do two activations just because he's a Union player and for no other reason. So we'll go ahead and activate the infantry. Now the first activity underneath this activation is the orders step. And in this step, he gets to change orders for the infantry brigades that he has designated as being active. But there are a few steps to this. Now, one of the things that was clear to me watching Hermann put a video out, that he was saying that they should start with an order. And I agree. I mean, these guys have had all the time in the world to get their orders. We shouldn't need to be rolling for orders. Orders are given at the brigade level, at the infantry brigade level. Artillery batteries do not get orders. They are independent. They do not have leaders on the map. But infantry brigades do have leaders, and they're the ones who issue the orders to the various formations, i.e. infantry regiments in their charge. So instead of rolling to see if orders are accepted and all that, I'm just going to assign orders as a turn zero thing. Again, this should also be explained in the setup for the scenario. It is not. The intention is to have orders already out there on the table. It should say so. And frankly, I think it's silent on this point, and that needs to be addressed in the rule book. Both brigades have been given a maneuver order by their brigade commanders. I'm saying this is automatic as part of the setup, so there was no die rolling involved. Normally there is. All right, and the Union gets to pick which of the two he wants to deal with first. Let's go ahead and deal with these guys. De Trobriand's one regiment that he has on the board. If we were going to be rolling for orders, the actual first step of the procedure is checking brigade command control to verify what is and is not within command control of this brigade leader. Each leader is rated for 1, 2, or 3 stars. It's printed on the counter, being inferior, average, or superior, and you take that times 2, and that's the number of spaces their command radius extends. Tracing through woods counts as 2, and tracing down a road counts as 1/2. So with de Trobriand sitting here, sitting on top of one of his units, and the other 2, stacking is 2 by the way, the other 2 in the space 1 away from it on a road, they are absolutely within command radius. The second step is to make sure that the regiment that is within radius has formation integrity. It's interesting to me that the explanation of formation integrity doesn't happen till the movement section of the rule book. That seems kind of odd to me. And honestly, this one sentence that's explaining formation integrity set me back the farthest as far as understanding what this means. I'll just read it to you. Every unit in the formation, which would be an infantry regiment here, must be adjacent to at least one other unit in the formation, forming a single connected chain of units. Now, what was not clear to me is, let's say if you had 4 units in a regiment, could you have 2 next to each other and then a space and the other 2 next to each other? And since everybody's next to somebody, is that formation have formation integrity? And after much head scratching and thinking, it's pretty clear to me that to have formation integrity, all the units, every single one of them, has to be next to somebody else in that formation, and there can only be one and only one chain of units. So that's why it says forming a single connected chain of units. Well, it's hanging a lot on that word single here, and it would be nice if they spilled a little more ink really ramming that point home. But that is what they mean by it. I am pretty darn sure. In this case, everybody's next to each other. What it doesn't say also in here, by the way, is that stacked units, stacking of 2 is legal in this game, like you see the 2 in front, count as being adjacent. Nowhere does it explain that stacked units are to be considered adjacent. Sometimes in this rule book you use common sense to get where you need to go. All right, but these guys are good. So the next step, we could actually roll for changing orders. Now you don't have to designate what order you're trying to change to. You simply roll on the order change table, which we really don't want to take a chance of the order changing now. So they're going to just keep their maneuver order. So how do units move in this game? Well, first off, there's no terrain effects chart that has so many movement points per hex, or in this case, space. Units get to move 1 space straight ahead. That's the rule. If they pivot, it costs an action point to do that. So 1 action point to move 1 space straight ahead, 1 action point to pivot 45 degrees. Stacks can move together, so we have the 2 lead guys here are in a stack, they will move together. Units can side shimmy at a double cost, so it costs 2 actions to do that. They can also reverse engines and either about face and go, or they can just walk backwards. The more advanced things like walking backwards, side shimmying, cost 2 actions per space. Going forward and pivoting costs only 1. So how many actions does this particular unit get? Well, printed on the counters is a 3. That's the quality of the troops, average quality. It's also the number of actions they get. But that number is modified based on their orders, and a particular movement order gives 1 free movement action. And second, since their brigade commander starts the turn stacked with them, not that it moved in there later on in the turn, but it started there, they get 1 extra action for that. So these guys are going to get 5 actions. So action 1, we pivot. Action 2, we go 1 space forward. So the unit has pivoted and you move forward, but if you notice, it crossed a fence line. And when it crossed that fence line, the formation incurs a disruption point. Or maybe we should call it a provisional disruption point. Now, it doesn't matter how many spaces of rough terrain the formation goes through during its activation. The most disruption it can get is 1 point. After they have 6 points, bad things happen, and they generally degrade point by point as they're accumulated. But there is a special thing they can do. If they do a redress action at the end of their movement, it has to be right at the end of the move, costs 1 action point. It nullifies any and all disruptions that have been accumulated. So it all is washed clean. Anything that was already there is not washed clean, but any new disruption that was accumulated because they went through rough terrain is washed away and not counted. In this case, the infantry formation, which is the 17th Maine Regiment, would accumulate 1 disruption point because these guys went over the fence. All right, so they've used 2 points of movement. They have 3 more actions left. Well, one of them we're going to use to redress. So that's going to be 3. They can go forward 2 more. Let's move forward 1 more. And let's say we do a pivot. So we've pivoted, moved, pivoted. That's 4 points. Last action they're going to do is redress. So any disruption that was accumulated goes away. Next guy. He's going to do something similar. He can go through those woods. In fact, that's what he's going to do. He's going to pivot, move. He's going to right next to those guys and then redress. And there will be no added disruption to this infantry formation. Now, at any point during this brigade's activations, if there were more than 1 regiment, we'd be moving on to another regiment. You have to complete a formation's actions completely before you can go on to another formation, i.e. you have to finish with 1 regiment before you can do another one that's within the same brigade that just activated. But there are no other regiments, so these guys would be done. They would have the option of moving that leader, which I think they should do. So we're going to do that, so that he'll start the next turn with these guys and they will get the bonus action that I discussed earlier. And the last thing that happens during this brigade activation is that the brigade leader flips to his activated side. And so now we know that this guy is activated this turn. But remember, the Union gets 2 activations, and they chose the 2nd Infantry Brigade to do the same. All right, so this 2nd Infantry Brigade that's activating under maneuver order. The maneuver order gives them that extra movement, okay, but it restricts firing to a minimum, and it also means they cannot do any reorganization actions to try to get their heads screwed back on correctly. I think it makes sense for these guys to cover up these victory squares. Actually, this game kind of is squares. I mean, it's got octagons, but they could have just as easily printed squares on this map. It would have got you to the same place. I remember the old Avalon Hill games. Gettysburg in particular was printed with square spaces, if you guys go back that far. All right. So he's got to pick a formation, which is an infantry regiment. So we'll start at this end of the line and take a look at our 124th New Yorkers. Getting back to our normal sequence, we have to check command radius when we attempt this activation. And Ward is a 2-star leader, so he has a base 4 for how far he can trace. Now, to be in command, remember, there's really two things. One of the units within a regiment has to be within his command radius. Not all of them, just one. But that formation has to have formation integrity. So if there's anything going on that they're not all together, they cannot be in command. If they don't have formation integrity, they are not in command. But we see everybody's grouped together here. Even the guys going through the woods. 1, 2. Looks like 90th Pennsylvania. My eyes aren't what they used to be. I'm sorry. But these guys would be 2, 4. The 2-star leader, he has radius 4. These guys tracing through the back door. There's no issues with that. And the game started up with everybody next to everybody within their formations or stacked with them. Everybody has got formation integrity and everybody is in radius. So there are no command issues here. The order is move it. Now he can go ahead and try to roll to change that. Problem is he could get that right now. And let's say he doesn't want to do that. Okay. So we're going to be going under a maneuver order. We're going to activate the 124th New York here on the end. I think this is pretty simple. How close do we want to get? They're up on a hill here. It's probably hard for you to see. Well, maybe you do see looking at my screen. So this is level 4. Space elevations range from level 0 to level 5, I think. So this is pretty high up. This is a hilltop here. They're on level 5. That's probably the highest square on the map. We have an artillery piece up there. One section, half a battery. But we want to cover these. Let's leave the artillery up there. That would be a separate activation. The artillery batteries are formations as far as activating goes. And so we didn't select them. We only had 2. We selected the 2 infantry brigades. So that'll have to happen later. Let's just move them down. Let's say we don't want to get too close. We can be behind a fence line here. But we do want to cover these things. So the 124th New York is going to advance 1 hex. He didn't have to be under a maneuver order to accomplish that. But this guy's going to go 1, and he didn't cross any terrain, so he doesn't need to redress. With this guy crossing a fence line, he's going to have to go 1 and then redress. And then they're just not going to use the rest of their actions. Now again, these units get 1 bonus move because they have a maneuver order. So with 3 quality, that's 3 actions under normal circumstances, 1 free move. They got plenty of moves. So the next guys over are the 86 New York. The New Yorkers are going to go 1, 2, and then redress. And they still have an extra move, which they are not going to use. And so they move up. Note that units may pass through the lines, i.e. units may pass through each other, friendly units, without any real penalty. If 2 units try to pass through 2 units, then a disruption occurs. All right, these guys get 4 points, 1, 2, 3, and redress. And that was the 20th Indiana, and finally the 99th Pennsylvania is going to do the same thing. They got 1 free move, and then 3 others. They can easily go 3 and redress. So continuing on with the Confederates, this goes back and forth. So the Union were forced to be the first player by the Southerners who won the initiative. Now the South is going to get to go. We have 3 formations, 3 infantry regiments within this brigade, which is all they've got. They got 1 brigade on the map. The number of actions each of these guys is going to get is going to vary. We have a 3-point average unit, a 4-point, which is the Arkansas, and the Texas is a 5-point activation unit. Remember, Texans always move them. All right, but we don't have the leader stacked with anybody with the maneuver order, which is what we're going to give them, and that is going to be a priori, no rolling, no checking, they just have it, okay? And I can tell you that everybody is within command range. Everybody has formation integrity. Everybody's all kind of together. So we'll put a maneuver counter down and we will start moving units. Begin with the best. We have the 1st Texas here. They have 5 action points plus the free move, so they get that one for free, plus 5. Now, these guys could go really running out there, but some of the other regiments, like the Georgians in the back, only have 3 with the 1 free move. And these guys have 4. The Arkansas boys have 4 with 1 free move. So, you know, there may be a limit to how far we want to stick ourselves out there. So the 1st Texas has 1 free space of movement plus 5 action points. I think we're going to go to the edge of the woods. That's 4 spaces away, 1 of which is free, and redress, and he'll have 1 point left over. And so the Texans have moved up. So here we go. They're up there. They had 1 point left over. No disruption for the formation. All right, next, we've got some Arkansas troops. And the Arkansas troops have 4 plus 1 free movement. I think we'll just kind of put them 1, 2, 3, 3 up and a redress. So 1 is free, 2 they pay for. So they also have 1 point left over that we're not going to use. And finally we got the Georgia troops, which are kind of average rum-dums. So they've got 1 free plus 3. They'll move up 3 and redress. And finally, we want Robertson to do something to maintain command control over these guys. He's a 3-star leader, so he gets 6 points. Remember, the woods can't double, but there is a road going through there, so he should have no problem finding a suitable space to live in. And there we go. And in this game, again, it's like squares. Diagonals actually cover more distance than the orthogonal directions, but they still count as 1. So that's 2, 4, 6 because of all the woods. 2, actually you can go 3, 4, 5, the road will count as half. For command radius, they make it real clear that if you go moving along the road, it counts as half. They really need to do the same when infantry or whatever form units are moving. Do it on the actually move on the road, because they don't do that there. There's no explicit statement that they have to be moving along the road. In fact, there's no formations in this game, so you know it's kind of abstracted out, changing into column, changing into line. It's not really explicitly part of the design. All right, but these Confederates are done. Robertson is changed to his activated side. The Union is up. They have 2 artillery batteries, so they get to activate both of them. So let's start by activating this particular battery that's over by the wheat field. Now, unlike brigades, artillery batteries don't care about orders. They don't get orders. They're always in command control. None of that affects them. So we can bypass all that stuff that we did with the infantry brigades. The one thing it does say is kind of a sort of exception, is that artillery units are always given the benefit of any combat modifier that applies if the unit is under a defend order. For example, they may always issue opportunity fire. That's fine, that makes sense. However, there are other things you can do with a defend order, such as go to ground. I think they should just dispense with the whole idea of an implied defend order and just say they can do opportunity fire. I've never heard of an artillery battery going to ground, and I certainly have never heard of an artillery battery being able to fire and service the gun, its crew servicing the gun while they are laying on the ground. So I think they need to revise that just to get rid of the whole linkage to a defend order and just say they can do opportunity fire when somebody comes next to them. All right, I'm back from a battery recharge for the camera and a dinner break. So, where we left ourselves is we were going to be doing some shooting. We have two federal batteries active. You do them one at a time, and so we're starting with these guys. Now, to do shots in this game, a few criteria have to be met. First, that you have to have a target in range. Well, these are smoothbore cannons that we're dealing with here. Their maximum range is 8. Extreme range is considered to be ranges 7 or 8, and we have a target here at range 7. So yes, there are guys within range. They have to be within the field of fire, and the field of fire is a 45-degree cone coming out from the face of the unit. And these guys are practically smack dab in the middle of that, so there's no issues with being in the field of fire. And finally, they have to be visible. And of course, we get into line of sight rules, and that's always the bugaboo for this type of game. So I'm going to go through line of sight rules here in a second. And the final thing is that if there's multiple targets, they have to be the closest one that meets all the other criteria. So if you have one target at range 3 that meets all the criteria, one at range 4, you have to shoot at the one at range 3. No choices. All right. Line of sight in this game. Well, first, unlike just about every other game I've ever seen, you don't take out a string or a rubber band to go from the shooter to the target and then try to figure out whether you cross any blocking terrain. It doesn't work that way in this game. Instead, you actually use the spaces to regulate not only the movement, but also to figure out line of sight. Each unit has 3 spaces to its front, and it may shoot through any of those 3 spaces. So for the battery, one option would be to go this way, other is here, and the third is there. And we'll go through line of sight for each of those. Before we do that, let's talk about blocking terrain and just kind of how all this works. To determine whether the visibility criteria is met, you're looking at spaces in between the shooter and the target, excluding those 2 spaces where the shooter and the target is. Line of sight is traced through any one of the 3 frontal spaces that the unit could potentially shoot through. Blocking terrain comes in 2 types, and let's just call them primary and secondary just to put a name on it. Primary blocking terrain is the tough stuff. It's woods, farmhouses, and units, and it doesn't matter whether they're friendly or opposing units. They will tend to block more than other types of terrain. Secondary blocking terrain can have an effect, but it's less of an effect than the primary. Those would be things like orchards and wheat fields and other crop fields that there's some potential to see through. The other thing that you have to deal with line of sight, of course, is elevation. I think I mentioned earlier there are 6 elevations going from level 0 to level 5. All right? And what matters is the relative elevation between the shooter and the target, and then what is the elevation of what's in between. An easy example, if there's a space between a shooter and a target that's higher than both the shooter and the target, terrain is blocked. It doesn't matter whether there's primary, secondary, or any other kind of terrain hanging out. Line of sight is blocked. Second, if the intervening terrain is lower than the shooter and the target, in that case, spaces containing primary blocking terrain will obstruct line of sight. They won't block it, but they will obstruct it. In cases where the shooter and the target are at the same level, all the intervening spaces are at that level, then primary blocking terrain blocks, secondary blocking terrain obstructs. Now, it gets a little bit more difficult when we have elevation differences between the shooter and the target. They pretty much handle them shooter above target versus shooter below target. You just flip the logic around and it kind of works that way. But let's talk about where the shooter is higher than the target. When you have an elevation difference between the shooter and the target, when there are any spaces that are in between the shooter and the target that are the same elevation as the firing unit, the higher unit, Any primary blocking terrain will block, and any secondary blocking terrain will obstruct. In addition, if there are any spaces intervening between the shooter and the target that are at the same elevation as the target unit, any spaces containing primary blocking terrain will obscure. They will only obscure when there's the elevation is the same as the target unit, the lower unit. Now, something that's not in here is that what if there are no spaces that are at the same level as the shooter and no spaces that are at the same level as the target? Let's say it's a gradual down slope. Let's say you've got a shooter at level 3, a target at level 1, and all of the intervening spaces are at level 2. Let's also assume that all the spaces are woods, heavy terrain, primary blocking terrain. Well, in this game, there's no blocking at all. It's not obscured, it's not blocked, because there's no case in the line of sight rules that says what happens if you have terrain that's in between the two and there's no terrain at the same level as the higher, same level as the lower. In that example, the shot is unaffected, line of sight is clear. Now, personally, I think that's kind of weird. I would want to say if I say in this case I'm at range 7, and let's say all the spaces were woods, and that is possible on this map. I don't see how on earth you could possibly have an artillery shot not be obscured out that far with all the woods intervening, even if the height of all the intervening hexes are, say one lower than the shooter and one higher than the target. To me, it'd be at least obscured, but this is the rules as written. I think that's something I would house rule. All right, how does that affect our artillery shot? So we're going to have this guy taking a shot at this guy. First, is he in range? Maximum range for smoothbore guns, which is what these are, 8. And ranges 7 and 8 are considered extreme range. So he's got a long-range pot shot with a smoothbore artillery section. Is it within field of fire? Well, the 45 degrees to the front of the unit, absolutely, he is in the middle of it. Line of sight, now we talk about that. Now, we have 3 ways to go with this space. Every space has 3 spaces to its front. The first one is over here, and I marked it with a red tiddlywink. Why did I do that? Well, units are primary blocking. This guy, the shooter's at level 3, and this intervening hex is at the same level. So when we have an intervening hex that's at the same level as the shooter, who's at a higher elevation, and in this case he is, the target's at level 1, that primary blocking terrain will block the shot. And that's what's happening here. Units of either side block the shot. Let's go out the other diagonal space here. In this case, the first space out is also at level 3, same level as the shooter. So when you have intervening hexes the same level as the shooter or the target, these line of sight rules kick in. Well, in this case, we have a wheat field. And if you recall, wheat fields are secondary blocking. When a secondary blocking space intervenes under these circumstances, the line of sight is obscured. We have a space that's intervening at the same level as the higher of the 2 units, in this case the shooter, and therefore the secondary blocking terrain obscures. So, now the way this works is once it's obscured, it never gets worse unless the blocking criteria is met. So you can have everything being obscured and it doesn't get any worse than obscured. And all you need is one blocking space to block the shot. Basically, this is all going downhill through a wheat field. Doesn't matter really what else is there. There's nothing blocking it. Until we get to, okay, here we have primary blocking, woods. Now, this isn't blocking. Why isn't this blocking? Because this primary blocking terrain is at a lower level than the shooter. It's also, it's at the same level as the target. And when you have primary blocking at the same level as the target, with the shooter higher, that obscures. So it's just another example of an obscured hex. We're already obscured, nothing changes. And we continue on with the same thing, and boom, we get to the target with an obscured shot. Okay, if we go that way. If we shoot straight, in this case, the first space coming out in front of the shooter, who's at level 3, is level 2. The target is at level 1. So guess what? Like I said, those in-between elevations, nothing matters except for things at level 3, the level of the shooter, and level 1, the level of the target. So according to the rules, nothing matters. We don't get to the case where anything blocks. It gets down to the catch-all. Okay, if it isn't blocked already, it's not blocked. So as we go forward, this is at level 2. This is at level 2, can't be blocked. This is at level 1. Now that space is at the level of the target, but we have the shooter elevated. This is secondary blocking terrain. It does not have any effect. Same thing here, level 1. The shooter is at level 3. We're down at level 1. There's no blocking here. Now, however, we get to here. Okay? In this case, we have primary blocking terrain. And in this case, you have primary blocking terrain at the same level as the target. It becomes obscured. So this becomes obscured. The fence, this is a stone wall, has no effect on line of sight. That's a wooden fence, that's a stone fence. And we continue to here without any change until it gets to the target. So this shot, whether we take the diagonal and then go straight, or whether we just go straight and then take the diagonal, works out the same either way. It's going to be an obscured shot. All right. So we have an obscured shot. How does this work? Well, the first thing to understand is that you only get one shot per activation. However, what you can do is to pump activation points in there to increase the effectiveness of the shot. So you're going to only roll the die once, but the more activation points you can pump into it, the better the shot is going to be. So this is an extreme range shot. The base to hit for an extreme range shot is 10%. We have 4 action points with this firing artillery unit. First one just gives you the shot, and then each one after that at extreme range is going to give you an extra 5%. So the 10% goes to 25% chance of hitting straight away. To that 25%, there are some additional modifiers. For example, target in woods is minus 15. The shot is obscured is minus 10. So that would bring us down to a 0, but it is plunging fire. It's a downward shot going from level 3 to level 1. That gives us a whopping 5% chance of hitting. Most dice in this game are percentile. All right, so we have a 5% chance of hitting this target with our gun. I'll just roll it. I get a 69, no effect. His neighbor is going to have the exact same shot. He's going to go down this way. Same target, he has a 5% shot. And he gets an 82, and there's no effect there. All right, so both units have shot. They used all 4 of their activation points. They are now done. When artillery is done, they get a battery activated counter. They don't have leaders you can flip, so they get a counter just for this case when they have been activated. And that activation is complete. The second battery we have, or actually it's just a section of battery, is up on this hilltop, which is at level 5. These guys down here are at level 1. We have friendly infantry in between. That is at level 4. So the potentially obscuring or blocking terrain, which is the unit, is primary blocking terrain. It is in between the elevation of the shooter and the target. And according to the rules, these in-between cases do not block, do not obscure. If the unit was adjacent to the target, that would be different. There's a special rule for artillery not hitting troops when there's a friendly unit next to them. But that's not the case here. So this guy can shoot at the Texas Brigade. These guys are rifled, and they're only at range 4. And at that range, it is a battle range shot, or medium range. They give it a jazzier name. It's medium range. We start with a 20% chance to hit. Looking at the other modifiers, this battery it's an average quality battery, so it has 3 activation points. The first one lets you shoot. We're adding in 2 more pumps. And at medium range, each one gets you 10% more, so we go from 20 to 40%. Target is in the woods. That makes it a 25%. There's no walls. And it is plunging fire. We are shooting down at the target I see nothing else that's going to affect this shot. All right, so we start with 20, becomes 40, becomes 25, becomes 30. So we have a 30% chance of hitting this target. 30%. Percentile dice. We get a 0.8. Oh, we get something. Texas Brigade feels this one. Ooh, ah. And then, since this is a miniatures game, we'll jazz it up with a little smoke. That's always a good thing. So this here was our target. Let's go ahead and figure out what that does. All right. Well, it's a hit. What kind of hit, you might ask? Well, since it's less than half, I rolled an 8, and the hit was, what, 30? 8 is less than half of 30, or less than or equal to half of 30. So that's not a normal hit. It's a murderous hit. It is a nasty, brutal, murderous hit, but it's not a critical hit. If I roll doubles, two things happen. One is that I get a critical hit in addition to the murderous hit. Second thing is that I get to pick another card from the deck and give it to the shooter. All right? That doesn't apply in this case, so we will go ahead and apply the murderous hit. And all that is it makes the unit battle worn. Or if it was already battle worn, it would pick it up. In this game, units can come back via the regroup order under certain circumstances. They can also recover from disruption as well. If this was a normal hit, it would have been a disruption point, but it's not. By the rules, you put down hit markers on the units that you have damaged before you actually put the damage into effect. So no one else is going to shoot, but let's just go through the motions. This guy received a murderous hit. All right, that's all the shooting there is, this activation, because there's only one guy. So the murderous hit takes effect, and this stand, using the parlance from miniatures, becomes battle-worn. That's his battle-worn side. He looks like he's been in a fight. All right, well, it was an effective shot. This guy is done. The Union has activated both of its batteries, so that's the 2 that they get to do. And so I will put an activation marker on the shooter, and we can pick up the smoke. And there we be. All right, play reverts over to the Confederate side. So at this point, everybody has activated all their units, and we're essentially at the end of turn 1. There's a little cleanup that would be done. The activated side of leaders would be flipped back over to unactivated and so forth. But turn 1 is essentially done. Now, since we're getting upwards to an hour on this one, I am going to call this part 1 of my video. What I want to do in part 2 is to actually play the second turn more at regular speed rather than diving into all kind of rule explanations. I'm just going to try to play the game so you get a better idea of what it has to offer, as well as a more realistic pace, because this was done rather on the slow side. We were all kind of learning the game here. There were 2 subsystems that I did not yet talk about. First would be melee. I may just summarize that. I don't know if I want to get into the depths of that. And second, card play, which is pretty easy. It's optional. I like it. So we will go through that a little bit, play turn 2, and then I will offer my closing commentary on the game. So, this is the end of part 1. Part 2 will be coming soon to a YouTube channel near you. But for now, if you have not subscribed, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up. Send me a comment. I read all of them and respond to most. For now, this is Paul the Oakenite, wishing you all a pleasant evening. Bye for now.